we know from our flourishing in ministry research that what the main thing that promotes resilience and prevents burnout for clergy is cultivating emotional intelligence kinds of competencies. And the literature is clear that we can all grow in those. We all maybe start at kind of a different place, but we can grow in those. And so we thought as we kind of start coming out of COVID, sort of, hopefully, and move into whatever the new realities look like, we want to help you access your own resilience as well as those that you're leading. And nobody better to do that than Dr. Sylvia Hart, who's a dear friend. She's also a licensed counselor, a certified spiritual director. She's a professional certified coach and mentor coach with the International Coaching Federation and a national board certified health and wellness coach. She's the co-author with her father, Dr. Archibald Hart, of a book called The Digital Invasion: How Technology is Shaping You and Your Relationships. And her work's been featured in the New York Times, Focus on the Family, the Christian Post, Fox News, and many others. She is thankfully serving as our Director of Coach Training in the Center for Vocational Ministry. And so it's just a real honor, special privilege, Sylvia, to have you with us. Thanks for being here, and I will hand it off to you.
Thanks, Chris. Brother Chris, it's such a joy to be with you and with everyone today. And I was talking to Chris right before we started, and I said, so we had a really good sign up for this. I'm interested. Is it because they want to raise their own emotional intelligence or because they want to help others? So I decided it's probably a little bit of both. But I am passionate about this topic of emotional intelligence. I call it EQ. You will hear it called EI. I prefer EQ just because most people seem to be more familiar with that term. But I'm passionate about EQ because we all want to live with and work with people who have good EQ, don't we? And really having good EQ, like Chris was saying, helps us to be more resilient. You know, we want to be emotionally intelligent and emotionally healthy. In that way, we can love God well, we can love ourselves well, and then we can love others well. Because you've heard it before and you can hear it again today, you lead out of who you are. Pete Scazzero says emotional health, which he defines as our ability to be self-aware and to love well, and contemplative spirituality, which he says is slowing down to cultivate our relationship with Jesus. When we bring those two things together, he says they offer nothing short of a spiritual revolution in our lives. So today I want us to look at being emotionally healthy, having good emotional health, having good emotional intelligence. So how I got passionate about this topic is after doing the research that Chris mentioned, the book I wrote with my dad, The Digital Invasion, I started seeing this correlation between how our EQ is going down the more time we spend looking at screens. And I worked a lot with university students, the younger generation especially, just seeing this loss of the ability to maintain eye contact, the ability to focus and listen well. That's huge. We're seeing this decrease in empathy, of course, an increase in narcissism, and we're losing the art of conversation. And that may not sound like a big deal, but if you think about it, conversations are really what it means for us to be humans. And especially in families, it's through conversations that children learn about life, and they learn about empathy, and they learn self-awareness. So I'm sort of on a campaign to help raise all of those, to help people increase their emotional intelligence and to have those face-to-face conversations that are so important. So the saying goes, IQ can get you hired, but EQ helps get you promoted and helps you keep your job. So having good EQ will also help prevent against burnout. Chris is really passionate about that. My dad spent most of his career passionate about helping ministry leaders prevent burnout. So being able to increase your emotional intelligence and those that you lead will really help them to not only be resilient, but also to prevent against burnout. And I'm always looking for ways to raise my own EQ. I know when I taught at university, they would call me the queen of EQ, but honestly, I'm always working on that. It's an ongoing process that you never arrive at. I've also found this out, that the people that say they have really good EQ are the ones that usually don't have good EQ. So I'm not sure why that is. So I'm hesitant to say whether I have good EQ or not, because I think we're all in process. So wherever you are today on the EQ scale, I want you to think about, as you want to coach others in their emotional intelligence, I want to help coach you in yours so that you can, wherever you are on the EQ scale, that you can increase your EQ. And the good news is that, unlike IQ, that is pretty set, with effort, really anyone can increase their EQ. I have given you some articles and recommended reading at the end of my PowerPoint, and I encourage you to share that information with your team. I really encourage you to try to develop an emotionally intelligent culture in your workplace. It's so important. But before we delve into the nitty-gritty of EQ, I just want you to think for a minute. What instantly comes to your mind when you think about your favorite leader? What thought comes to your mind? Just take a minute and think about that. What comes to me is communication, definitely self-awareness, empathy. And then I want you to think about what instantly comes to your mind when you think about your least favorite leader. For me, it's micromanaged me. They weren't flexible. Definitely a lack of self-awareness. So one of the reasons I became passionate about emotional intelligence was I've spent all my career working in the church and in a university setting, and I've experienced, unfortunately, the culture of low EQ. I've experienced people leading by fear, where the institution is more important than the people. I've seen leadership work hard to silence the critics. I've seen extreme loyalty to the leader, no matter what they do. I've seen where the leader is known for their charisma and not for their character. And unfortunately, I've seen a great lack of inner work in leaders. And I'll just share with you some of my experiences. I've worked with leaders that intimidate, that are inconsistent. You don't know what kind of mood they're going to be in each day. You're fearful about losing your job, saying the wrong thing. You walk on eggshells. And working in this culture of fear, it's interesting because it actually keeps you in the fear center of your brain. And this is going to block your creativity, that executive functioning, and really your ability to make good decisions. So I want to share with you an excerpt from my dad, Dr. Archibald Hart, his book, Crazy Making Workplace. I haven't looked at this book in years. It's on my shelf. And as I was preparing, I thought, I want to see what Dad has to say about this. So I want to share with you 7 symptoms of what he says makes for a dysfunctional leader. Maybe you work with someone like this. Maybe you are this person. We'll just let the Spirit convict on this. But the first symptom is that the leader subjects you to unwarranted stress that slowly erodes your self-confidence so that you become less and less the person you want to be. Conversely, good leaders, right, help us become more of the person we want to be. Number 2, my dad says, the leader is unable or unwilling to affirm your job performance or set such high and unreasonable standards that you constantly feel unappreciated. That way, they're always in control. Number 3, the leader makes you feel that you have no rights, that you cannot avoid or change the way the organization functions, so you feel powerless. Number 4, their communication is poor or non-existent, and you're never sure exactly what is expected of you or whether you've achieved a goal. He goes on to say, number 5, new ideas are suppressed, creativity is discouraged, and constructive suggestions are taken as personal criticism because the leader has a frail ego. Number 6, the leader is unstable, overreactive, or emotionally disturbed and is unaware of the forces that drive them. They have a self-awareness. Number 7, the leader neglects to deal with incompetent supervisors and remains inaccessible and aloof from workers. So I thought that was interesting as I was just reading through some of his book that was written many years ago, but I think still pertains to our world today. I like what Carl Jung said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. So I have to tell you today, I've learned a lot from leaders who've had low EQ. Maybe you have too. But thankfully, I've also had the privilege of working for some leaders that had great EQ. They over communicated. They were able to find ways to utilize my strengths. They were very encouraging, and I really felt safe with them. They were consistently in the same mood each day because the leader's mood is contagious. We laughed a lot. They knew how to really use humor well, and they really cared about us as employees, and they were displaying empathy. And here's a good one. They were a calm, non-anxious presence. I just love that. A calm, non-anxious presence. You know, I was thinking about it that we need more leaders like that great theologian, Mr. Rogers, right? You know, Mr. Rogers was a master of EQ. I don't think many people realize that. You know, he was empathetic. He really cared. And he showed us that really all our feelings are natural, they're normal, and that they are manageable. Because Mr. Rogers was really just a good and kind person. And I believe people will always thrive with this kind of leader. So if you like this topic that we're sharing today on emotional intelligence, I really want to recommend the book Emotional Intelligence 2.0. It's by Dr. Travis Bradberry. It's not a really big book. It's just a small book, but there's a code actually at the back of the book that you can use to take an EQ assessment, just to show where you're strong and maybe areas that you need to work on. I've also added some different EQ 360 assessments in the resources at the end of my PowerPoint. But honestly, this book is my favorite one to use when coaching for EQ. It's very simple and practical. The client will take the assessment. You can go on and you get the book and take the assessment, and they'll get about a 20-page printout, and then they can decide what areas they need to work on. And they actually get to take the test a second time for free after a few months. So I try to get a client to sign up for 12 weeks of coaching for emotional intelligence. That way they have some time to really see some progress and take the test again. But I also just have some articles I give them, and then some coaching exercises as well, really depending on the client. I love to customize my coaching on what their needs are. And then I really encourage them to get a copy of Pete Scasero's The Daily Office to read each day, because I think that just dovetails it so well about doing that inner work. Well, let's jump in. Emotional intelligence, what is it? So I'm going to share with you some different definitions of emotional intelligence. This first one comes from Peter Salovey and John Mayer, the other John Mayer, not the singer. They say EQ is the ability to monitor one's own and other people's emotions, to discriminate between different emotions and be able to label them appropriately. So for example, I'm frustrated, or I'm disappointed, or I'm scared, not just I'm angry, right? Being able to really narrow that down, and then to use this emotional information to guide thinking and behavior. Emotions are information. My dad used to say all the time, we need a healthy theology of emotions, because emotions aren't good or bad. All emotions are useful because they're telling us something. And honestly, it's when we ignore our emotions and we don't process them, especially our grief and our losses, that they'll show up as anger. And that's a big part of resilience, being able to process those emotions. And again, we don't have time to get into all of this today, but the emotion is the tip of the iceberg. There's a whole lot going on underneath that maybe you're not aware of, or the client's not aware of. Their core beliefs, the family of origin, all their experiences, their trauma. And so when I'm coaching for emotional intelligence, I really am also encouraging my client to be willing to do the deep work. Maybe they need to go get therapy. Maybe they need to work with a spiritual director, but to really explore those areas, because what's inside will come up and come out. Well, let's look at another definition of emotional intelligence. This one's from Daniel Goleman, and he is considered the grandfather of EQ. He wrote the book in 1995, Emotional Intelligence, Why It Can Matter More Than IQ. But he says EQ is the ability to perceive emotions, to access and generate emotions so as to assist thought, to understand emotions and emotional knowledge, and to reflectively regulate emotions so as to promote emotional and intellectual growth. And I'd like to add my own definition to that: the ability to manage and express emotions in an age-appropriate manner. I don't know about you, but I've worked with a lot of people who are babies or children in their emotional responses. And honestly, even in my own responses, I frequently have to ask myself, Sylvia, how old do you feel right now, right? Because it's really hard work to be an emotionally healthy and mature adult. But I know that it's worth it. And that's really one of my core values. I have that up on a board, my vision board that I look at each day. And being an emotionally healthy and mature adult is such a great gift that we can give to ourselves and to those that we live with and minister with. So if you want to see what emotional intelligence is not, then just watch Michael Scott on the show The Office, because really he epitomizes what EQ is not. So emotional intelligence, why is it important? We see what it is now. Why is this so important? Well, emotionally intelligent people are not as stressed and anxious as others. We see they're usually happier and have better emotional stability, mental health, and physical well-being. Emotionally intelligent people have better and stronger relationships. And as leaders, emotionally intelligent people are proven to be more effective. You know, most of the time, people don't get fired for having good EQ. And in that book I shared with you, Emotional Intelligence 2.0, Dr. Travis Bradberry says, how much of an impact does emotional intelligence have on your professional success? He says the short answer is a lot. It's a powerful way to focus your energy in one direction with a tremendous result. Of all the people we've studied at work, he says, we found that 90% of top performers have high EQs. You can be a top performer without emotional intelligence, but the chances are slim. And really, I've seen this, and I'm sure you have as well, as I've worked, as I said, all my career in the university setting and in churches, but we could say we see this in corporations as well. You know, they hire a 4.0 highly educated individual. They really don't rise to the top because they have low EQ. You know, they don't have what's called the likability quotient. They shut people out, they're distant, they're aloof, and it really hurts their work. If you've never heard of that term, likability quotient, I came upon it a few years ago, and it's really defined by, do people feel they can trust you? Are you a safe person? You see, I'm not going to trust you as a leader if I don't feel safe and if I don't like you. So that likability quotient is so important. Michael Hyatt talks a lot about this, and he says, if you want to be likable, just demonstrate that you like people. Smile a lot. Remember people's names. Look in people's eyes. Ask them questions about themselves and listen carefully and show your gratitude to your team. I know a lot of what I'm sharing seems obvious, it seems simple, but I think it's so helpful to really bring it down to simplify these concepts. And it's really imperative that you raise your EQ and you're able to coach leaders to raise their EQ, because research shows us, especially in ministry, that over time, EQ issues in ministry leadership will eventually trump every other issue in your ministry. We see a lack of emotional awareness and the people skills that go with it, rather than moral failure, have been the underlying factors in most cases where pastors were asked to leave or chose to leave in discouragement or conflicts. Yes, we do have moral failure, but more times than moral failure, it'll be because the leader does not have good emotional intelligence. Social and emotional abilities are 4 times more important than IQ in determining professional success. And then a lack of emotional awareness and relational maturity may be taking down far too many ministries. But if pastors work to combat their weaknesses and grow their relational skills, they will not only safeguard their ministries, but also allow God to mature their faith so that they reap the fruit of richer, healthier, more resilient relationships. And that sounds really good to me. Chris and I have talked about this before, and I've talked with others. You know, why aren't we teaching emotional intelligence in our seminaries? You know, why aren't we teaching it more in our churches? This really needs to be more of a priority. And so I just want to share Daniel Goleman's model for emotional intelligence. And you can see there, he's broken this down into 4 domains. You have self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. And underneath those domains are the core competencies under each one. So as I'm sharing these different domains, I want this to be like a coaching exercise for you. I want you to assess, where are you strong? What domains are you strong in? And what are some areas that you would like to increase? And even think about people on your team. How could you maybe share with them a webinar or share something that would help them. So we're going to start with self-awareness. Daniel Goleman said that having high emotional self-awareness is the strongest predictor of overall success. But unfortunately, it's also the hardest of the four to develop. But self-awareness serves as the foundation for the other three domains. So we want to start with self-awareness, and then from the self-awareness will come the other three. So if you have self-awareness, you always know how you feel. You understand your strengths, your weaknesses, you know your dragons. My sister, Dr. Sharon May, talks a lot about dragons. In fact, she worked with Dr. Daniel Amen, and Dr. Amen just wrote a whole book on knowing your dragons. You know your hot buttons, you know your limitations. You know, you and I are limited. And it's really when we respect those limitations that's going to help prevent burnout. But we have to be self-aware to even know what those are. If you have self-awareness, you know how your emotions and your actions can affect the people around you. You have clarity on your core values and your sense of purpose. And you behave with humility. You aren't above the people you serve. And this is so important. I've worked with so many leaders that were above everyone. You know, we're not above the people that we work with. We serve them. And I really believe that pride comes from a lack of self-awareness. When we really don't know our self-identity of who we are, then we have to sort of be like that puffer fish, right? And puff up. But if we really have good self-awareness and we know our limitations and we know our strengths and we know our weaknesses, we won't have to be prideful. So to improve self-awareness, how do we improve it? Well, really every moment is an opportunity for us to practice and improve our self-awareness. We need to acknowledge our weaknesses. We need to be honest, transparent, and vulnerable. We need to know what triggers our strong emotions. You know, one of my triggers is inefficiency. So if I'm working with someone and they're just really inefficient, it really pushes my buttons. But it's not just in the workplace. I could be in a store and someone's just really inefficient. That's a hot button for me. I can really get triggered by that. So I have to know that and have self-awareness over that. One of the greatest things I did, I believe, to help raise my EQ and increase my emotional intelligence was just keeping a journal in my desk. So I've done this for years. If I have a meeting I'm in and it goes sideways, I just open up my desk, pull out my journal, and I just write down what was happening. What was I feeling? How old did I feel in that meeting? And just really process immediately what was happening to me in that moment. It's such a great tool to use. And then just try a few minutes each day, be self-reflective and write down your thoughts. What are you experiencing? What are your emotions? What are your triggers? What's happening in that when you were dealing with that person? What was going on in you? The other way to increase your self-awareness is just to slow down. You know, when you experience anger or other strong emotions, just take time to examine what's going on here. You know, this is really important. Remember, no matter what the situation, you can always choose how you respond. People forget that. They feel like I had no choice in how I responded, but you always do have a choice. So I want to share with you the next slide is a feeling wheel. And I use this with my clients. I use this myself to just assess what am I feeling, and also to plug into, not, if you look at the wheel, not just the more difficult feelings, but also assessing your positive emotions, and then try to build more positive emotions in your day, and help your clients to do the same. So to ask, you know, what brings you joy each day? Are you doing things each day that bring you joy? What makes you feel more peaceful? How are you building on those emotions and encouraging those in your life? So it's not just about managing the difficult emotions, it's also about building more positive emotions as well. Let's look at the next domain there, self-management. So if you have self-management, and I also like to call this self-regulation, you can effectively self-regulate and rarely verbally attack others. If you have self-management, you won't make rushed or emotional decisions. Boy, does that get us into more trouble when we make those emotional decisions. You don't stereotype people. You don't compromise your values. I put there, you stay in control of yourself, but I actually prefer to say you regulate yourself. I was listening to Dr. Kurt Thompson, and he was talking about, you know, we really can't control ourselves. that as human beings, we really don't control anything. Isn't that great to hear? We work so much of our life trying to control things. But he says, we don't really control anything. We regulate things. I can't even control my heart rate. I regulate that. So if you are regulating your emotions, then you'll be able to stay calm in a crisis situation, and you're going to be able to recover quickly from upsets. So if you want to improve your self-management, your self-regulation, it starts by knowing your core values. And if you haven't done that, I want you, when we get off this webinar, write those out today. You need to know what your core values are. One of my core values is loving well. So knowing this core value, this really helps to impact how I self-regulate, how I respond to others, because it's through that core value that I look through the lens of how do I want to respond here. The next way to improve it is to hold yourself accountable. Just take responsibility for your actions. Don't blame others. The devil didn't make you do it. She doesn't make you mad. He doesn't make you mad. You choose to be mad, right? So just take responsibility for that. And then to improve self-management, just think before making decisions. I know that sounds really simplistic, but we need more thought before we make a decision. And I like to make major decisions in the morning, not the evening. I've made that mistake. You've heard of the decision fatigue. If you're making a lot of decisions during the day, don't wait till the nighttime to make a big decision. Make those major decisions in the morning. And practice being calm. Are you that calm, non-anxious presence? Just take deep breaths during your day. Check in with your emotions. How are you doing? How are you storing that in your body? And then my mother used to say all the time, don't panic, my dear, pray. And that's it's so simple, but so important. We have the Holy Spirit to help manage us, to help us, give us that self-regulation that we need. So the next competency there or domain is social awareness. So let's just look at this. How are you doing in these different domains? If you have social awareness, that means you have good rapport with your team. You communicate your ideas clearly. You're a great team player. And you can read what other people are feeling. And this is really important for emotional intelligence. You're able to look in someone's eyes and know what they're feeling. In fact, they tell us that the eyes show more of how someone is feeling than any other part of the body. So really check in. If you're sitting in a meeting, I don't take notes. I try not to take any notes in a meeting. I try to just sit there and scan. I know it's a lot harder with Zoom, but to scan a room and just really see what's happening, look in people's eyes, read their body language. What is happening? What is the mood like? Who just shifted the mood? What happened to, Jimmy over there? What happened to Susie? It's so important to do that. And then if you have social awareness, you have high empathy. Boy, do we have a need for empathy in our day to day. So some ways for you to improve your social awareness: try to just pay full attention when someone is speaking to you. Look them in the eye. I try to say, Sylvia, the greatest thing I give someone, my greatest presence is my eyeballs, right? Just to really give someone their full attention. And then to listen to what they're saying. I'll be honest with you, I struggle with this. I am really good at playing this game of I anticipate what I think someone is going to say. Like I'm thinking, oh, they're going to say this. And I have to really self-regulate and say, Sylvia, listen, you don't know what they're going to say. Don't assume you know that. Just listen. And many times what they say is not what I thought they were going to say. So maybe if you have that issue, to really try work on that, slow it down. Don't talk over someone or try to hijack the agenda. Are you the type of person that when someone shares something, you immediately turn that spotlight back on yourself, right? So you tell me how busy you are, and I take that spotlight and I put it right on me. Oh, you think you're busy? I'm so busy, I can't even see straight. Those kind of people. Yeah, I'm sure we all are at times that kind of person, but try to keep that spotlight on them. It's their story. It's not the same as yours. It's never the same. And then ask lots of questions and put yourself in that person's shoes. That's how you practice empathy. What is it like to be this person? And then pay attention to nonverbal communication. Like I said, when you really observe in meetings, are people folding their arms? It means they're shutting down. Are they lifting their chin? That means they're getting defensive. Are they avoiding eye contact? Maybe they're feeling shame. Maybe they're lying. And then avoid office drama. Don't stir the pot. We need to be peacemakers. and look for ways to solve problems and minimize tension. If you're in a meeting and you're observing, you'll be able to catch those things before they get out of control, and maybe just, address it right then when you see that body language, to be able to say, Susie, what's going on right now, right? To be able to address that. Well, let's look at relationship management here. If you have relationship management, that means you're a coach and a mentor to your team. You're able to manage conflict well. You're an inspirational leader. You build strong bonds with people. And this is really important, because the weaker your connection with someone, the harder it's going to be to influence them. And as leaders, we want to have strong bonds with our team, because we want to be able to influence them. We want to be able to encourage them, and they need to be influenceable. So really work on building those bonds. And some ways to do that is ask questions. Then reflect back what you hear them saying, which is really what we do is in coaching, right? We ask questions that we're curious questions, and then we reflect back. What I'm hearing you say is, right? That really is a great way to improve your relationships and those bonds. And then try to focus on the positive. People thrive in positivity, not negativity. How can you say this in a way that is more positive? And then set clear expectations. This is so important, to be able to say what you need from people. It's so hard to work for someone where you just don't know. Do they want this? Do they want that? Don't hint, don't be vague, be just very clear. And then explain your decisions. Don't just make them. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. Explain why. I love those leaders that had good EQ that I've worked for. I love when they just explained why we're doing things. It made me feel like I was an equal. It made me feel like maybe my input was valuable. So explain your decisions. And then I can't overemphasize this skill enough. Over communicate. It is so hard to work with someone who doesn't communicate well. I'm not a mind reader. You're not a mind reader. So just, maybe even say to your team, maybe I'm over communicating this with you. They won't feel that way. They will love it. And really work on this in all your relationships. We get into so much trouble when we assume that, I assumed you knew that. I assumed this, I assumed that. So don't make those assumptions. Really over communicate. And then take feedback well. I'll be honest, feedback is really hard for me. One time someone shared that, Sylvia, feedback is just love. That person loves you enough to give you feedback. So I try to remind myself of that when I'm getting it. Okay, this person's just loving on me right now, because it doesn't always feel that way. And we got to consider the source. Sometimes it's not done out of love, but most of the time when someone's taking the time to do that, it is love. And we can really learn and grow from being able to take feedback well. Next one, learn conflict resolution skills. And then lastly leave people feeling inspired, motivated, and connected. That's what people with good EQ do. Wouldn't it be great if everyone left a conversation with you feeling inspired, motivated, and connected? So I want to talk about, in the next slide there, just coaching leaders to resolve conflict, because all leaders will face conflict. And those that you coach, a lot of what people will come to you for coaching is because they're maybe dealing with some kind of conflict in the workplace. So here are just some questions to ask when you're trying to resolve conflict. The first one is, what do I really want for myself in this situation? The second one is, what do I really want for the other person? And then what do I really want for the relationship? And then the last one, how would I behave if I really wanted these results? And I love the honesty of that question, because sometimes we don't really want those things, right? I want to be mad. I want to be in conflict with this person because they really irritate me. But when we're really able to step back and say, big picture, what do I really want? I want a cohesive team. I want peace in the workplace. And so if you're really able to step back, how would I behave if I really wanted these results? And so what I've done with this is I just wrote this out on a card, and I would keep it at my desk just as a reminder when I encounter that conflict, to be able to slow it down and ask myself those questions. And that's how you coach yourself, really. Self-coaching is so important. And ultimately, whoever I coach, I'm always getting them to eventually be able to self-coach. So I gave you an article entitled Amygdala Hijack and the Fight or Flight Response by by Arlene Kunsick. And she says in there, have you ever lost control of your emotions? It did something in the heat of the moment that you later regretted. Perhaps you've lost it or blown up at someone, your partner or child, a work colleague, or perhaps the driver of another car, to such a degree that later you realized was uncalled for. If your answer is yes, then you've probably been hijacked by your amygdala. So I want us to look at this, that slide of the brain there. I want to look at the physical pathway for emotional intelligence in your brain. So we see your primary sense there, something happens, an event happens, it's going to enter through your spinal cord, and it's going to travel to the front of your brain before you can think rationally about the experience. But the problem is it first has to travel through the limbic system. That's your feeling or emotional brain, the place where our emotions are experienced. So good EQ requires that this road between your feeling brain and your thinking brain is well traveled. So you can go back and forth easily and they communicate well together. So the area where we can have trouble and we can end up stuck in our feeling brain and have an amygdala hijack, and flip our lids. So I want us to talk about this. I used this illustration when I taught students and faculty members at the university I worked at. And it was great because I'd have people coming up to me and saying, Sylvia, you wouldn't believe it. I flipped my lid yesterday. Or, oh, Dr. Frejd, I almost flipped my lid. So I started seeing these EQ buzzwords surface, and it was really great because that's how you develop really a culture of EQ. So very quickly, I'm going to demonstrate to you, you have an amygdala hijack and you flip your lid, what that looks like. So I want you to take your hand, and you're going to make a fist around your thumb. Okay, this is your spinal cord. And then in the center of your brain, your thumb is going to be your limbic system. That's your emotional feeling brain. And then up here, you have the prefrontal cortex, your thinking brain. I know I'm really simplifying this, but Daniel Siegel does this really well to illustrate it. So to have good emotional intelligence, you're going to need your thinking brain and your feeling brain to stay connected. Because remember, we need those pathways. We need them to go back and forth. So this is how it goes. You encounter an event, right? Your emotions are triggered. The amygdala takes over, and you have what's called an amygdala hijack, where the fear center in your brain takes over. Your feeling and thinking brain gets disconnected. Boop. So I taught this to university students and they enjoyed the sound effects, right? Boop. We flip our lid, and that's when we say things we regret because we're just functioning out of that more primitive part of our brain. Sometimes we say things and we're like, this doesn't even make sense what I'm saying, right? So when you have an amygdala hijack, it's important you try to get your thinking and feeling brain to reconnect. So some ways to do that are just to take a few deep breaths, right? Slow things down. And then remember the 6-second rule. It takes the chemicals that are released during this amygdala hijack 6 seconds to dissipate. So you're going to use that time to focus on something pleasant to prevent that amygdala from taking control. So once you develop your self-awareness, I will start feeling, I'm like, I think I'm going to flip my lid, right? So then I immediately get up and I walk around, take a few breaths, put myself in timeout, right? Leave the room. If you're in a meeting, get up and go to the bathroom. One of the tricks that I do is I would keep a water bottle in front of me when I worked in the university. And this was great because if I started feeling in a meeting, like I think I'm going to flip my lid because my buttons were being pushed, I would just take a long sip. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005, 1006. Now my thinking and feeling brain are connected. Now, hopefully I can respond in a better way. So just some tips to help you. You can practice mindfulness where you just become very present, feel your feet on the floor, feel the chair underneath you. Just become present to this moment. Tune into what you're experiencing. I love how Rick Warren says, name it to tame it. What am I feeling right now? How old do I feel? And really just taking those extra 6 seconds, it's amazing, and working with your body chemistry to help prevent from having an amygdala hijack. So I shared this one slide with you. My EQ certification is through an organization called 6 Seconds, and they broke it down really simply here. And I showed this to you on the circle there. They broke it down to know yourself, which is self-awareness, and blue for self-reflecting. And then choose yourself for self-management. That's red for just pausing, stop and think. And then the green was give yourself for relationship management, and they chose green for flourishing because we want to give the best of ourselves away, not the worst of ourselves. So just as a reminder, you need to know yourself, how you react under pressure and stress, and just know that you can always choose yourself when you self-regulate. Such a great choice for yourself, because you're going to reap the benefits of choosing yourself when you self-regulate. And then we're here to give ourselves away really for the benefit of others. The next exercise there I gave you, this is a self-coaching exercise I give my clients, and it's just called the Think coaching exercise to help stop and think about something before you have a bad reaction. The T is just ask, before I say this, is this truthful? H, is it helpful? I, is it inspirational? Is this going to build up? N, is it necessary? Some things are truthful. They may even be helpful. They may even be inspirational, but is it necessary right now? And then K, is it kind? Remember, we want to be more Mr. Roger type leaders. Is this kind? So you can use that exercise for yourself. You can share that with your team. The next slide there, I shared with you earlier the likability quotient. And here are just 3 traits that everyone will find in a likable person. They will have humility, teachability, and flexibility. And I want you to think about this today. How are you doing in your likability quotient? Are you humble? Are you teachable? Are you flexible? I know as I look at that today, I will say, I need to work a little more on flexibility. I'm not always flexible. And so that's an area that, that I need to grow in. There was an article by Dr. Travis Bradberry called The 9 Habits of Emotionally Intelligent Leaders. So I've given you the article, but I just want to let us scan through some of these habits. And these are some that you can just think about. What habit do I want to increase? Maybe just pick one. The first habit is an emotionally intelligent leader. They're relentlessly positive. You know, you need to train your brain to not focus on the bad news. We're getting so much bad news come our way. In fact, I eliminated my news app. I'm just tired of it. So don't focus your energy on what you can't control, right? All the bad news. Think about what is in your control, which is your attention and your effort. Maybe you want to increase that habit. Or the second habit, emotionally intelligent leaders have a robust emotional vocabulary. Name it to tame it. Maybe you want to print out that feeling wheel I gave you and get better at being able to name your emotions. The third habit is they're assertive. You know, people with good EQ can balance good manners, empathy, and kindness, but still be assertive, right? We don't have to be doormats. How can you be assertive in a kind, positive way? Then the fourth habit, they're curious about other people. You know, we have to be good coaches, we have to have curiosity. To have empathy, we have to be curious about people. And the more you care about other people, the more curiosity you'll have about them. So think about that habit. The fifth habit, they forgive, but they don't forget, right? So emotionally intelligent people will not be bogged down by mistreatment from others, but they will be assertive in protecting themselves. You have to be wise, have a smart heart, a wise heart. The sixth habit, they won't let anyone limit their joy. You know, there's a lot of joy stealers, a lot of, I call them saint makers, people that are helping us become saints. Don't let them steal your joy, and don't be your own joy stealer, right? Our joy will be stolen when we compare, we contrast, and we compete. And let's be honest, we see a lot of that in ministry. We're comparing ourselves to others. And just remember this, you are never as good or as bad as people say you are. So that's a good reminder. The seventh habit of emotionally intelligent leaders, they make things fun. You know, I loved working with leaders that were able to use humor. Know what makes you happy, know how to bring happiness and some joy into the workplace, and how to inject some fun. And actually, research shows that injecting fun into our lives really can fight off stress, and that's what helps us to be resilient. The eighth habit, oh, I love this one. They are difficult to offend. Can people say that of you? Wouldn't that be great? Oh, Sylvia, she's really difficult to offend. Confession, I'm not there yet. But think about that. Emotionally intelligent people, they're self-confident and they have thick skin. And then the ninth and last habit, they're able to quash negative self-talk. You know, a big step to develop your emotional intelligence involves stopping our negative self-talk. So just try to write down your negative thoughts and then really work to replace those with the truth about your circumstances. So I'm looking at the time and realizing I have more, but you'll get it on your PowerPoint so you can see the rest of the slides that I have for you there. But let's just summarize, because I know I wanted to be able to have some time for questions, but let's just summarize some ways for you to increase your EQ and to help coach others to increase their emotional intelligence. The first, just be aware, right? Ask, what am I feeling? What am I thinking? And what are my emotions trying to tell me? Remember, emotions are information. They're trying to tell you something. And then pay attention. Learn how to feel your emotions through sensations in your body. Tune in when you're in a meeting, when you're just sitting at your desk. What am I feeling? Are my shoulders all scrunched up? Am I a non-anxious, calm presence right now? Expand your emotional vocabulary. I'm angry. No, don't just stay there, right? I'm sad. I'm disappointed. Grieve those losses. We've had a lot of grief and loss this year. You need to grieve those. Keep connected. Work to keep your emotional and thinking brain connected. If you get ready to flip your lid, take that sip of water. Stay optimistic. Remember, you always have choices in how you react. That's so important. We get in situations and we feel like, well, I had no choice. I had to blow up. You always have a choice. Take a 6-second pause, right? Get up, leave the room, gather your thoughts before you respond, get those 6 seconds, get those chemicals to dissipate. And then lastly, practice empathy. Get to know the people's stories that you work with. That's a great way to expand your empathy. Do you know the stories of the people that you work with, the people in your ministry and your churches? What are they going through? That will really help to expand your empathy. So I've given you some resources at the end of my PowerPoint. You can contact me there at my website. And I just want to say, are you a calm, non-anxious presence? I hope that you're working to that. That's a really big core value for me. And just remember, we all love to live with and work with people who have good EQ, and becoming an emotionally healthy and mature adult that loves well. This is really the greatest gift that we can give ourselves, we can give in service to God and in service to others. So I'm going to let Chris come in here. I think Freddie is going to do our questions.
Yeah, thank you, Sylvia. So much rich information. I was thinking about how I've been just doing different ministry stuff for the last 20 years by the grace of God. And it's only been the last 5 years with my connection with the Center for Vocational Ministry and yourself and Chris Adams that I've started to think about emotional intelligence and how that functions, in ministry and life. And so I know that all of us here on this Zoom are processing a lot of things. I want to go to some of the questions in the browse and the chat to honor those questions there. And I believe this came earlier in the conversation, and I imagine it was activated by some of your introductory comments about spirituality, loving God, loving others well. And the question is, do you consider that there is a difference between emotional intelligence and spiritual intelligence? It has been my experience that there is a significant crossover between these two domains. Yeah. So what do you see the connection there between emotional intelligence and spirituality and spiritual intelligence?
Yeah. And so that's why I had to reference Pete Scazzero as you started out there, because, he talks about, being emotionally healthy. And that's our ability to be self-aware and to love well, right? And then our spirituality, a contemplative spirituality, is sort of that vehicle that helps us to slow down so we can cultivate our relationship with Jesus, our relationship with ourselves, and our relationship with others. One of the things I usually say when I teach on this, and I'm kind of like this because I've got so much I'm trying to give you, and to narrow that down. But, these are secular models that we're looking at for emotional intelligence, Daniel Goleman's model, Travis Bradbury's model, but Pete Scazzero brings this in a great way by bringing in emotional health with our spiritual health. But, to really make it really simplistic, I think about, how we say, God does his part and we do our part, right? So God has given us our brains. The Holy Spirit empowers us, right? But I've got to work at being able to self-regulate. The Holy Spirit will help me, right? But there's steps that I need to do to be able to have that, my brain be able to go back and forth between my thinking and feeling brain. So I look at, like I said, what Pete says is that we want to have emotional intelligence, emotional health, which he does a good article in really differentiating between emotional intelligence, right? And what he's saying in emotional health. So he kind of expands it a little bit. But, I see it as our emotional intelligence is a way for us to be able to love well. And as we work on that, and as our spiritual intelligence grows, if you're talking about, spiritual intelligence, is through the disciplines, right? So now I can be a calm, loving, non-anxious person. That's going to be the fruit of my life that'll come out from those practices and from my being aware of what I'm feeling, what I'm thinking, and the choices that I make.
Mhm. No, thank you for that clarification. I was really reflecting on your imagery of the flip the lid, and very, very practical, easy to access. Thank you for that. There's a question here regarding the wheel of emotions, what you're feeling here, that you shared with us. What's the source? Is there an author, a book, or some sort of resource connected to this wheel that we can learn about or know about?
Yeah. So what a lot of people, it's just called the feeling wheel. And honestly, that's a wheel that I've liked. And I don't, the copyright says the feeling wheel, a tool for expanding awareness of emotions. And it says 1982 on it. I Googled it. I know a lot of people use the other one that's called, and I always get the name wrong. Is it Plutchik's wheel? I know that's what Daniel Goleman uses, if you're familiar with that. Plutchik's wheel of emotions.
Mhm.
So I like this one better, the feeling wheel, than the other one. I just thought it's really simple. So like I said, you can just Google it, and I took a picture out of that, but it's sourced to back to someone in 1982. But certainly you can Google and find more information of that.
No, thank you for that, Sylvia.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that I'm processing as you're talking and sharing, and that was really helpful, right? The wheel, thinking about what are the emotions that are just under right there, and checking in with ourselves before we say something that might not be helpful, or if we check in, or that will be helpful, right? Checking in and those emotions. Um, as you talked about some of the practical pieces of doing our self work, doing the deep work. I love that phrase that you use, and also how we as leaders, we want to coach others in this space. I have, I guess, because I'm mindful of the time, my last question is, um, what would be, you talked about therapy, spiritual direction, coaching as some of the resources. Um, what is a good first place for us to start? If we want to do the deep work, is it a coach? Is it a combination of accessing these resources? What would be your kind of your general recommendation to all of us as we want to do more work in this area?
Well, honestly, what I would say is probably coaching for emotional intelligence, and to get some kind of an assessment. Again, there's a lot of 360 assessments. Again, I'm a simple person, so I like the one that I use. There are others, but some kind of an assessment, and then work with the coach, and then see what comes up. If there are some deeper work issues that seem to be coming up, absolutely get some therapy. I mean, honestly, in my Rolodex, I have a therapist and I have a coach and I have a spiritual director. And there's times where I'm thinking, I think I need to talk to Rhonda. I'm calling her up, right? She's my therapist out in Washington. And then I have a spiritual director, thankfully, right here in town. She's 9 minutes from me. And I just call her up and say, I need to see you. And then I have a coach that I meet with. So that's where I would start with the coaching, and then just assess where you're at, and what comes up. And some things, when you're talking about emotions, people immediately think, oh, that's therapy. You can't deal with emotions in coaching, but you can. And so there may be ways to learn how to process emotions, get some of these tools without having to do therapy. But again, if it's something that's really causing you functional issues, right, that it's just really a functional issue, then absolutely get therapy. But I think in my experience and in those I've worked with, having all three at different times in your life can be really valuable.
Mhm. Thank you very much, Sylvia. I'm gonna hand it off to Dr. Chris Adams for closing comments.
Great. Thank you, Freddie. And those of you that know Freddie know that he has probably the highest likability quotient of just about anybody I think I've ever met. But thank you, Freddie, for that. And Sylvia, thank you. So much great material here. I would also mention that very soon we are launching Flourishing in Ministry Coaching out of the Center for Vocational Ministry. All the folks on my team here will be coaches, and there's some other folks on this call that will be as well, and Sylvia as well. And we'll be launching a Flourishing in Ministry Coaching certification if you want to become a coach, and there'll be a deep dive in that training with Sylvia into emotional intelligence competencies and other folks as well in that training. It's really a crucial set of competencies for ministry leaders, we believe, not just for well-being for clergy, but for effectiveness as well. And so please contact me, contact Sylvia if you're interested in that, and we will be sending out more information to our email list about all of that very soon. And with that, I'm going to ask one of my all-time favorite pastors, Pastor James Kinsler at the Santa Barbara Church of the Nazarene, to close us in prayer. Thanks, James.
God, we're so grateful for these moments that we've had to spend together. Grateful for Dr. Freyd, her presentation, for the good gifts that you have poured into her and her willingness to share with us today. And we pray, God, that we would have hearts to receive, minds to receive all that you are making known to us in these moments together, that we would be shaped, that we would grow, that we would become more and more the people that you have called us to be, that you need us to be in the world, and that we would also be people then who are freely sharing of all that you are pouring into us. God, we long for more of you. We long for you to lead us and to guide us daily, and to receive your blessings so that we might be a blessing to those that we come in contact with. And so fill us and resource us and put us into mission, into your work today. And so, God, I just pray your blessing over all those who are gathered here today, that we would just receive a fresh sense of your presence, your empowerment, that we would go from this place encouraged and believing that you are for us and not against us, and that we have opportunities before us today to bring joy to your heart and to the lives of those that we come in contact with. Again, we give you thanks, and we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, James. Thank you all so much for joining us. God bless you. Thank you, Sylvia, and have a wonderful rest of your day, everybody.